It was a quiet evening in the small suburban town of Maplewood, the kind of evening where nothing extraordinary ever happened. The streets were empty, the houses were dark, and the only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen of the Carter home. But inside that house, something extraordinary was about to unfold, something that would change the lives of everyone involved forever. John Carter, a middle-aged man with a kind heart and a quiet demeanor, sat on the edge of the couch, his eyes fixed on the little girl sitting across from him. Her name was Amara, a 6-year-old black orphan girl he had adopted just a few months ago. She had been through more in her short life than most people could imagine. Abandoned at birth, shuffled through foster homes, and carrying a silence that seemed unbreakable. Amara hadn't spoken a single word since she came to live with John. Not one. The doctors said it was trauma, that she would speak when she was ready. But John couldn't help but wonder if that day would ever come. He had tried everything to connect with her: books, toys, even learning a few words in her native language, though he wasn't sure if she understood. Every night, he would sit with her, patiently waiting, hoping for a sign that she was beginning to feel safe, that she was beginning to trust him. And then, on this unremarkable evening, it happened. Amara looked up at him, her big brown eyes wide and filled with something he couldn't quite place. Her lips parted, and for the first time, she spoke. "Help," she whispered. Her voice barely audible but clear as day. John froze. His heart skipped a beat, and for a moment, he wasn't sure if he had heard her correctly. "What did you say, sweetheart?" he asked gently, leaning forward, his voice trembling with hope and disbelief. Amara's eyes darted to the window, then back to him. "Help," she repeated, this time a little louder, her small hands clutching the edge of the couch. John's mind raced. Was she in pain? Was she scared? He reached out to her, but before he could say anything, she pointed toward the kitchen. Her tiny fingers shook as she gestured to the back door, her expression a mix of fear and urgency. John's stomach dropped. Something was wrong, very wrong. Without thinking, he grabbed his phone and dialed 911. As the operator's voice came on the line, John struggled to find the words to explain what was happening. "My daughter, she just spoke for the first time, but she's scared. She keeps saying help. I don't know what's going on, but something's not right." The operator assured him that help was on the way, but as John hung up, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time. He turned back to Amara, who was now standing, her eyes locked on the back door. "What is it, sweetheart? What's out there?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Amara didn't answer. Instead, she took a step toward the door, her small frame trembling. John followed her, his heart pounding in his chest. As they reached the door, he hesitated. What would he find on the other side? Was someone out there? Or was this just the imagination of a traumatized child? He reached for the handle, his hand shaking as he turned it slowly. The door creaked open, revealing the dark backyard. The moon cast an eerie glow over the lawn, and the trees swayed gently in the breeze. At first, John saw nothing out of the ordinary, but then his eyes caught something, a shadow moving near the fence. His breath hitched. "Amara, stay behind me," he said firmly, stepping in front of her. But before he could take another step, the shadow moved again, closer this time. And then, a voice, deep, menacing, and chillingly familiar, cut through the silence. "You should have left well enough alone, John." John's blood ran cold. He knew that voice. But how? Why? His mind raced as he tried to make sense of what was happening. Who was out there? And what did they want with Amara? Before he could react, the shadow lunged forward, and everything went black. When John opened his eyes, he was lying on the cold kitchen floor, his head throbbing. The back door was wide open, and the night air rushed in, carrying with it the faint scent of damp earth and something metallic. He blinked, trying to clear the fog in his mind, and then it hit him. Amara. Where was she? "Amara," he called out, his voice hoarse and desperate. He pushed himself up, wincing as pain shot through his temple. The house was eerily quiet, the only sound the ticking of the clock on the wall. His heart pounded as he stumbled to his feet, his eyes scanning the room. She was gone. Panic surged through him as he rushed to the door, his mind racing. Who had taken her? And why? He stepped outside, the cold air biting at his skin, and scanned the backyard. The moon was high now, casting long shadows across the lawn. The fence where he had seen the shadow was empty, but something caught his eye, a small, crumpled piece of fabric lying on the ground near the gate. He picked it up, his hands trembling. It was a piece of Amara's dress. John's breath came in short, ragged gasps as he clutched the fabric. He had to find her. He had to. But where would he even start? The voice he had heard, it had been familiar, but he couldn't place it. His mind was a jumble of fear and confusion, and he struggled to think clearly. Just then, the sound of sirens cut through the night, growing louder as they approached. The police. He had called them before everything went black. Relief washed over him, but it was short-lived. What would he even tell them? That his adopted daughter, who had never spoken a word until tonight, had suddenly said, "Help," and then vanished? It sounded insane, even to him. The red and blue lights flashed through the trees as two police cars pulled into the driveway. John ran to meet them, the piece of fabric still clutched in his hand. An officer stepped out of the first car, her expression calm but alert. "Mr. Carter?" she asked, her voice steady. "Yes, that's me," John said, his voice shaking. "My daughter, Amara. She's gone. Someone took her. I don't know who, but they were here. I heard them. I saw them." The officer nodded, her eyes scanning the yard. "Can you tell me what happened, starting from the beginning?" John took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. He explained everything, how Amara had spoken for the first time, how she had seemed scared, how she had pointed to the back door. He told them about the shadow, the voice, and then waking up on the floor to find her gone. The officer listened carefully, her pen moving quickly over her notepad. "We'll do everything we can to find her, Mr. Carter," she said when he finished. "But I need you to think. Is there anyone who might want to harm you or your daughter? Anyone who might have a grudge against you?" John shook his head, his mind racing. He was a simple man, a high school teacher who lived a quiet life. He didn't have enemies. At least, he didn't think he did. But then, a thought struck him, a memory he had buried long ago. Years ago, before he had moved to Maplewood, John had been involved in a court case. It was nothing major, just a dispute over a piece of land he had inherited from his father. The case had dragged on for months, and in the end, John had won. But the man on the other side, a man named Victor Grayson, had been furious. He had threatened John, saying he would regret it. John had brushed it off at the time, thinking it was just empty words. But now, as he stood in his backyard with the police, he couldn't help but wonder, could Victor be behind this? "There's someone," John said slowly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Victor Grayson. We had a legal dispute years ago. He threatened me, but I never thought." The officer's eyes narrowed. "Do you know where he is now?" John shook his head. "No, I haven't seen or heard from him in years. But if he's involved," the officer nodded, her expression grim, "we'll look into it. In the meantime, we'll need to search your property and the surrounding area. Can you think of anywhere Amara might have gone if she ran away? Anywhere she might feel safe?" John's heart ached at the thought of Amara running away. She had only been with him for a few months, but he had tried so hard to make her feel at home. He had taken her to the park, to the library, to the little ice cream shop downtown. But would she go to any of those places on her own? He doubted it. "I don't know," he admitted, his voice breaking. "She's so young. She wouldn't know where to go." The officer placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "We'll find her, Mr. Carter. We'll do everything we can." As the police began their search, John felt a wave of helplessness wash over him. He should be out there looking for her, not standing here doing nothing. But he knew he had to let the professionals handle it. They had resources he didn't: dogs, flashlights, radios. Still, the waiting was unbearable. He went back inside, his mind racing. The house felt empty without Amara, the silence suffocating. He walked through the rooms, his eyes lingering on the toys she had left scattered on the floor, the little pink backpack she carried everywhere. He picked up a stuffed rabbit she loved, holding it tightly as if it could somehow bring her back. And then, something caught his eye, a piece of paper sticking out from under the couch. He bent down and pulled it out, his heart skipping a beat. It was a drawing, one Amara had made. She loved to draw, though she never showed him her work. The picture was simple, done in crayon, but it sent a chill down his spine. It showed a house, their house, with a tall figure standing outside. The figure had no face, but in its hand was a long, dark object that looked like a knife. John stared at the drawing, his hands trembling. Had Amara seen something? Had she been trying to tell him? He thought back to the way she had pointed to the back door, the fear in her eyes. Had she known someone was out there? Before he could process what it meant, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, his heart racing. It was a text from an unknown number. The message was short, but it made his blood run cold. "You should have listened to her, John. Now it's too late." John stared at the text message, his hands shaking so badly he almost dropped the phone. The words burned into his mind, each one a punch to his gut. Asterisk, you should have listened to her, John. Now it's too late. Asterisk, what did that mean? Too late for what? His mind raced, trying to make sense of it. But the more he thought, the more the fear tightened its grip on him. He quickly showed the message to the officer, who immediately called it in. "We'll trace the number," she said, her voice firm but calm. "But for now, you need to stay strong. Whoever this is, they're trying to scare you. Don't let them win." John nodded, but the words did little to comfort him. He couldn't just sit here and wait. Amara was out there somewhere, scared and alone. Or worse, he had to do something. But what? As the police continued their search, John decided to retrace his steps. He thought back to the day he had adopted Amara. It had been a rainy afternoon, and he had driven to the orphanage on the other side of town. The social worker had told him about Amara's past, how she had been found abandoned outside a hospital as a baby, how she had been passed from one foster home to another, never speaking, never connecting with anyone. John had felt an instant connection to her, a pull he couldn't explain. He had known right then that he wanted to give her a home, a family. But now, he couldn't help but wonder if he had missed something. Had there been signs? Clues? He grabbed his coat and headed for the door. The officer stopped him. "Where are you going?" "The orphanage," John said, his voice firm. "Maybe someone there knows something. Maybe they can help." The officer hesitated, but finally nodded. "Be careful, and keep your phone on you. We'll call if we find anything." The drive to the orphanage was a blur. John's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions, each one more unsettling than the last. When he arrived, the building looked just as he remembered, old and worn, with peeling paint and a sagging roof. He knocked on the door, and after a few moments, a woman in her 50s answered. She recognized him immediately. "Mr. Carter," she said, her voice warm but tinged with concern. "What brings you here?" "It's Amara," John said, his voice breaking. "She's gone. Someone took her. I don't know what to do." The woman's face fell. "Oh, no. Come in, come in." She led him to a small office, where they sat down. John told her everything, about Amara speaking for the first time, about the shadow in the backyard, about the text message. The woman listened intently, her expression growing more troubled with each word. "There's something you should know," she said when he finished. Amara's case was unusual. She wasn't just abandoned. There were rumors, whispers, really, about her mother. They said she was involved in something dangerous, something that got her killed. But no one ever knew for sure. John's heart sank. What kind of danger? The woman hesitated, then leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "They said she was mixed up with a man, a powerful man who didn't like loose ends. If he found out about Amara," John's blood ran cold. "Do you think he's the one who took her?" "I don't know," the woman admitted. "But if he is, you need to be careful. This isn't just about Amara anymore. It's about you too." John left the orphanage with more questions than answers. Who was this man? And what did he want? With Amara? He drove home in a daze, his mind spinning with possibilities. When he pulled into the driveway, the police were still there, their flashlights cutting through the darkness as they searched the surrounding woods. One of the officers approached him. "We found something," he said, holding up a small object. It was a bracelet, a simple silver chain with a tiny heart charm. John recognized it immediately. It was Amara's. "Where did you find it?" John asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Near the edge of the woods," the officer said. "There were footprints, too. They lead deeper into the trees." John's heart raced. "Let me go with you. I need to find her." The officer hesitated, but finally nodded. "Stay close, and if we find anything, let us handle it." They set off into the woods, the beam of their flashlights cutting through the thick underbrush. The air was cold and damp, and the sound of their footsteps echoed in the silence. John's mind was a whirlwind of fear and hope. Was Amara out here? Was she hurt? As they walked, John noticed something strange, a faint trail of broken branches and trampled leaves, as if someone had been through here recently. The officer saw it too and motioned for them to follow it. The trail led them deeper into the woods, until they reached a small clearing. In the center of the clearing was a makeshift campsite, a tattered tent, a fire pit filled with cold ashes, and a few empty cans of food. But what caught John's attention was the piece of paper lying on the ground near the tent. He picked it up, his hands trembling. It was another drawing, this one even more chilling than the last. It showed a man with a knife, standing over a small figure lying on the ground. The figure was unmistakably Amara. John's breath caught in his throat. "She's trying to tell us something," he said, his voice shaking. "She's trying to warn us." Before anyone could respond, a noise came from the trees, a rustling, followed by a low, guttural growl. The officer raised his flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness. And then they saw it, a pair of glowing eyes staring back at them from the shadows. "Stay back," the officer said, his voice tense. But John couldn't move. His eyes were fixed on the figure emerging from the trees. It wasn't an animal. It was a man, tall, broad-shouldered, with a face that sent a chill down John's spine. It was Victor Grayson.